House Republicans scrapped a war powers vote last night. They were supposed to force Trump to get congressional approval for the war in Iran. Then they realized they didn't have the votes, so they called it off. Congressman Pat Ryan, a West Point combat veteran, was furious. He called them chicken hawks, sending other people's kids to die. The panel says Trump doesn't have the political juice anymore. Thomas Massie has carved out a lane running against the war, against tariffs, and against Trump. 45% of the country is independent and wants out of regime change wars. But one panelist isn't celebrating. He says all we have are vibes, no votes, no action, and when push comes to shove, Republicans fold. Let's watch.
These chicken hawk are going to send us home for Memorial Day weekend, where I'm going to honor my fellow veterans that I served 27 months in combat with, and they are going to not even give an up or down vote on continuing this war almost 3 months in, while Americans are paying almost $5 a gallon at the pump. It is pathetic. They use this procedural argument, and every American should just be absolutely outraged about this. It's a disgrace.
We need to get him on a podcast so we don't have to do all that bleeping. That was Democratic Congressman Pat Ryan last night, visibly outraged, but didn't seem too surprised, because naturally, what do House Republican leaders do when they are afraid of being rebuked by members of their own party over Donald Trump's increasingly unpopular and unaffordable agenda, including the war in Iran? Well, they call the whole thing off. Last night, House Republicans scrapped the war powers vote. It was meant to force Donald Trump to withdraw from the war in Iran, or at least try to get approval from Congress for it. After, as the New York Times puts it, quote, it became clear they, the Republicans, lacked the votes to defeat the measure. More from that report, quote, the decision to shelve the war powers resolution came after Republicans had lost control of the floor during an earlier unrelated vote, with several of their members defecting and several more absent. As the House chamber descended into chaos, leaders wary of risking another public defeat on a far more politically consequential vote abruptly scrapped the Iran war measure. We're back with Paul and Michael. This is perhaps one of the biggest political stories in the second Trump term, that Trump doesn't have the political juice to continue to wage war in Iran.
I think you're right. Pat Ryan's a friend of mine, and he speaks for so many people. He also is a West Point grad, a combat veteran. He represents West Point. It's in his congressional district. And he understands what he's talking about. And I think he's touching on something that a lot of Americans feel, especially veterans feel right now, that there's a generation of chicken hawks that are sending other people's kids to die all over again. And I think Iran has become a dividing point, especially within the Republican Party, especially within the veterans and national security community, with people like in the manosphere, the podcasters like Joe Rogan and Sean Ryan. But I also want to say that...
Who are out.
They're done. They said, we're done. That's it. He said no regime change wars. And now Tulsi Gabbard's out, who her entire platform, she said no regime change wars more than any politician I've ever seen in the last 2 decades, right?
But it's J.D. Vance.
Yeah. And it's also Congress is also the dog chasing the car, because Iran's already underway. The question is, can they stop Cuba? Because he said Cuba's next. They're communicating it, like there's probably an over-under on the poly market now, whether he does it before or after July 4th. But they didn't stop him on Venezuela. They didn't stop him on Iran. They have an opportunity to stop him before he starts combat with a new country. And Cuba is that dividing line. I think we have to try to push that to the forefront and see where Republicans stand on that, because in some ways Iran's already underway.
Well, the thing that people say, and they point to Indiana and they point to Cassidy and I guess Massie and say, well, he's still really powerful in the Republican Party. You can't say that without pointing out how small the Republican Party is right now. It's shrinking by the week.
Yeah, I think Massey's really, really important. I've been talking about this a lot this week. I mean, he just carved out a whole new lane for a presidential campaign just by running against Iran, against the tariffs, in favor of releasing the Epstein files, and against Trump. That's a presidential platform that's pretty popular.
In either party.
In either party, or no party at all. He could also run as an independent and galvanize a lot of people. And he's worked across the line with Ro Khanna and others. So something's happening here. Whether the movement is going to be within the Republican Party to challenge Trump and whoever his successor is if he leaves power, or to actually break away. And they're representing a majority of the country that is against all those things, but also doesn't want to go to the Democrats. 45% of the country is independent and unaffiliated, and they're looking for voices who represent that angry majority, especially on national security and regime change wars.
It's amazing how wide open this question of national security is right now, Michael Feinberg.
Yeah, I'll be honest. I'm not quite as ready as you two to put up the bunting and celebrate at the Republicans' newfound discovery of integrity in his spine, because all we've got right now are, to use a word I hate, vibes. We don't have concrete actions. There haven't been votes on any of these things. There's been rhetorical pushbacks. There's been rumors leaking out of closed sessions. And when push comes to shove, the Republican voters have not supported the individuals who've pushed back. And the individuals who claim to push back when the moment of crisis comes don't. Mitch McConnell could have stopped all of this in that speech you played earlier and didn't. So I'm not confident that Republicans are actually going to have the mettle to follow through on this.
I'm with you. I appreciate the gentle blowback. That's why you're here. Michael Feinberg, Paul Reichoff, thank you both for being here today. Have a great weekend.
This is not a congressional hearing. It is a panel discussion about what happens when a congressional hearing doesn't happen. And that is precisely the point. The House Republicans had a war powers vote scheduled. It was supposed to force Donald Trump to either withdraw from the war in Iran or come to Congress and get formal approval to continue fighting. That is how the Constitution is supposed to work. Article 1, Section 8. Congress declares war. The President executes it. But somewhere along the way, the script flipped. Presidents started wars. Congress rubber-stamped them. And the War Powers Act of 1973 was supposed to fix that. It didn't. Last night, Republicans had a chance to enforce it. They didn't. They scrapped the vote because they realized they didn't have the votes to win. Several of their own members were ready to defect. Several more were absent. The chamber descended into chaos, and instead of risking a public defeat, Republican leaders pulled the plug. Congressman Pat Ryan, a West Point graduate, a combat veteran who served 27 months in combat, was furious. He said it's pathetic. He said it's a disgrace. He said every American should be outraged. And then he used a word that got bleeped. The panel picks up from there. Paul says this is one of the biggest political stories of the second Trump term. Trump doesn't have the political juice to continue waging war in Iran. The votes aren't there. The support isn't there. Even his own party is fracturing. Michael agrees. He calls out the chicken hawks, people who send other people's kids to die while never risking their own. He notes that the anti-war movement is coming from unexpected places. The manosphere, podcasters like Joe Rogan and Sean Ryan, Tulsi Gabbard, whose entire platform was No Regime Change Wars, J.D. Vance, and Thomas Massie, especially Thomas Massie. Paul points out that the Republican Party is shrinking by the week. You can't talk about Trump's power without acknowledging how small his coalition has become. Michael takes it further. He says Massie has carved out a whole new lane for a presidential campaign just by running against Iran, against tariffs, in favor of releasing the Epstein files, and against Trump. That platform is popular, not just with Republicans, with independents, with 45% of the country that is unaffiliated with either party. Massie could run as an independent and galvanize millions. The question, Michael says, is whether this movement stays inside the Republican Party or breaks away entirely. The issue is Cuba. Trump has signaled that Cuba is next. The administration is communicating it. There's probably an over-under on Polymarket about whether he invades before or after July 4th. Congress didn't stop him on Venezuela, didn't stop him on Iran. Iran is already underway, but Cuba is not. Cuba could be the dividing line, the moment where Republicans have to show whether they actually believe in stopping regime change wars or whether they're just performative. Then Michael Feinberg throws a bucket of cold water. He says he's not ready to celebrate. All we have right now are vibes, not concrete actions, no votes, no legislation, just rhetorical pushbacks and rumors leaking out of closed sessions. Republican voters have not supported the individuals who've pushed back. And the individuals who claim to push back, when the moment of crisis comes, don't. Mitch McConnell could have stopped all of this. He didn't. Feinberg is skeptical that Republicans will have the mettle to follow through. He's been burned before. We all have. How many times have we seen a Republican criticize Trump in a closed-door meeting and then vote with him on the floor? How many times have we seen a principled conservative fold when the whip count came in? The pattern is familiar. The courage is fleeting. The panel ends with agreement. Paul appreciates the gentle blowback. He says that's why Feinberg is there. Then the host signs off with a reminder of who is really in charge. Donald J. Trump. The name hangs in the air like a warning. The deeper issue here is not whether Republicans have the votes to stop the war in Iran. They clearly do, or at least enough to make leadership nervous. The deeper issue is whether they have the will. The Constitution gives Congress the power to declare war, but that power is useless if Congress won't use it. The war powers vote was a test. Republicans failed it before it even happened. They didn't lose the vote. They canceled it. That's worse. Losing means you fought. Canceling means you were afraid to fight. And the message that sends to the White House is clear. You can keep waging war without us. We won't stop you. We won't even try. Pat Ryan's outrage is real. He served. He lost friends. He knows what war costs. And he watched his colleagues on the other side of the aisle refuse to take a stand. Not because they support the war. Because they're afraid of Trump. Because they're afraid of a primary challenge. Because they're afraid of losing their seats. They are sending other people's kids to die because they are afraid of losing their own jobs. That is the definition of a chicken hawk. The panel's discussion about Massie is interesting. He has emerged as a genuine anti-war voice in a party that has forgotten what that means. He voted against the war. He's willing to say Trump is wrong. He's willing to break with leadership. But Feinberg is right to be skeptical. One congressman does not a movement make. And until there are votes, actual votes, not canceled votes, nothing has changed. The Republican Party is shrinking. That is true. The independent vote is huge. That is also true. But neither of those facts guarantees that Republicans will grow a spine. History suggests the opposite. The war in Iran continues. American blood and treasure are being spent, and Congress is sitting on its hands. Not because they can't act, because they won't.